Star Wars, best place for below average Star Wars.
Hello there, and welcome to the Star Wars Show, a UK-based Star Wars podcast with in-depth discussions and analysis sprinkled with some silliness. I am the Geordie Jedi Pete,
And I am Jason Hondo Ling.
and we are back with a brand new episode of Star Wars. This time we're going to be a deep dive reviewing the latest Star Wars Disney Plus TV series. It's just finished. It is Star Wars Skeleton Crew, which was of course created by John Watts and Christopher Ford, and it does star Jude Law. We're going to be deep dive reviewing the whole series. As I said, there was 8 episodes in the series. It's just finished this past week. So if you have not watched any of Skeleton Crew, or if you've seen some of the episodes but haven't watched them all, definitely pause the podcast now, go watch the rest, or go watch all of it, then come back, because we are going to be diving deep into it. We're going to be telling spoilers, we're going to be analysing everything, probably going to get a bit silly about it and talking about all the things that we like about it as well. So last warning, if you have not seen any, or if you've only seen some of Skeleton Crew, definitely pause now, go watch it, then come back. Otherwise, it will be spoiled for you. But yes, Skeleton Crew, it tells a coming-of-age story about 4 children who make a discovery on their home planet. They then get lost in the galaxy, and they go on an adventure to get back home. Jason, obviously, Skeleton Crew, we've talked about our thoughts, I suppose, in the build-up of the trailers and things like that, but I suppose before you sat down and watched episode 1 of Skeleton Crew, sort of, what were you expecting from this series as you sat down to watch it for the first time?
I think as the build-up got closer, I think I said several times on here, I was getting more and more excited about what was to come. Initially, this series sort of left me thinking, oh, it's going to be a kids series. I'll watch it, and that'll be about it. But then, as I saw bits and pieces, I saw interviews, and I just thought, yeah, I'm actually quite looking forward to this. So I went into it looking forward to it with an open mind. I always went into it realizing that it was aimed more at kids, possibly than some of the other material. But obviously, we were told it was going to be based in the Mandoverse, so we knew that it was going to tie in to stuff like that. And there was pirates, so I was looking forward to it. I was looking forward to the hopeful arrival of my favourite pirate, but we'll talk about that later.
We will indeed. So sort of going into the series, I think that John Watts and Christopher Ford had promised a sort of an Amblin-esque throwback to the childhood movies of the 80s. You're talking E.T., Back to the Future, The Goonies, Monster Squad, sort of things like that, I suppose, tied in, which we did get, which we'll talk about. Sometimes I thought too on the nose in terms of theming. I thought the story beats worked fine using those elements. The children sort of lost on an adventure. That's fine, worked great. But then I thought some of the actual trying to style Star Wars to fit 80s Earth was a bit too on the nose. But there we go. But yeah, basically the premise of this show, obviously roughly 5 years after the fall of the Galactic Empire, 4 children end up on an adventure to make their way home after being lost in the galaxy following a discovery they make on their home planet of At-Atin. While they're on this adventure, they obviously befriend a Force user. I mean, let's just dive in with sort of, the main story beats, I suppose. We have sort of 2 groups of friends. We have Wim and Neil, and we have Third and KB. They're sort of in this sort of 80s high school world. Wim's very much dreaming of a life as a swashbuckler, a Jedi, an adventurer. sort of leaving this small down suburbia and going to the city, you could say. Almost like Luke Skywalker, he's dreaming of not being a farmer anymore. He's dreaming of the galaxy, fighting in X-Wings, things like that. And we sort of see him come across, obviously, the ship, which we find out later is the Onyx Cinder, an old pirate vessel, which has crash landed on at Atin a long time before these children find it. All four children end up sort of inside the ship and activating it, and they ended up leaving the planet Atarin. Obviously, when they leave, they realize that no one's heard of Atarin, or they've heard about it in stories if it's not real, a treasure planet, you could say, which garners unwanted attention. But let's just dive in. Sort of, what was your thoughts on the plot, and what were some of your favourite things about what happened to the kids once they left Atarin, and sort of their interactions with the wider galaxy?
Yeah, the beginning for me, obviously the opening with the ship being attacked and Captain Silvo and his gang, that was brilliant. I loved that, and you thought, these pirates, that it was a really good boarding of the ship, reminiscent in some ways of going back to the boarding of the Tantive with Vader, and there were you had people hiding and shooting at the incoming pirates. And then there was the reveal of some of the pirates. We had a nice mix of aliens, and then you had this character, first mate Brutus, who was really, to me, he harkened back to the days of the type of traditional character that we saw in the Cantina, going back to the original Star Wars. So I really enjoyed that part, and obviously, so then it was setting it up. We are in the Star Wars galaxy, and as you rightly said, then when we went to the 80s sort of style of this planet where the kids were going off to school, it was a little bit jarring because it was very much, oh, this is a little bit too on the nose for being real. But the more I got into it, the more I sort of thought, well, there could be, and as the writers rightfully said, in a huge galaxy, there could be a planet similar to our own and all this. What I did find was that it was easily relatable for a younger audience to the characters. So you have Wim, who, scarily enough, he reminded me of me as a kid who loved these adventures, playing with the Star Wars figures and everything. So that was a bit scary seeing someone that could be me. And then you had Neil, who was like the scaredy cat, sort of didn't really, he was sort of being dragged along, not necessarily wanting to get involved. And then we had the other group of friends, the two female groups, where you had Fern, who was very much tomboyish, go getter. She was sort of rebelling. So there's always a rebel sort of thing. And then there was KB, who was, as we later found out, a little bit. She'd had her own problems. She was trying to overcome those. She really looked up to her friendship with Fern, who had a really tight bond with her. And I enjoyed that grouping and the way they created this grouping of kids, that I thought they did really well with that. And I have to admit, seeing the interviews with them afterwards, the actors seemed to get on really well, and they created this sort of group out of the film, out of the TV series, that I should think they'd stay friends for a very long time. So obviously the first episode, we'd seen Captain Silvo, but we hadn't seen Jod, who was this character that had been teased, obviously, through the trailers and that. So I worked out quite quickly that Captain Silvo was Jod, but I liked the fact that a lot of people I spoke to didn't actually twig that. So, hats off to the directors that, a lot of people did realise straight away, but others didn't twig who he was, which made it, I think, show how successful they did pull off some of the little beats. But as the episode went on and we got to meet the group, I thought it was really good. We saw insights to their lives with their parents, with their school life. And that first episode really did create the atmosphere of what was going to happen. And then obviously finding the ship that they originally thought was a Jedi temple was really cool. And I think seeing the ship take off and abandon drag them off into space is Wim's dad just sort of watches in horror was really good. It harkened back to me to Flight of the Navigator and that sort of thing. And as you say, they very much went for those Amblin type of films and I think they did it quite well, mixed in with the Star Wars galaxy. Yeah, and obviously then as we go into the adventures, I think the storyline flowed each episode quite comfortably for me. So, the first part we get to see them with the pirates, and obviously we're introduced to SM-33, who I think was absolutely brilliant for this series. That to me really captured the essence of the sort of pirates with like the Long John Silver esque sort of thing. And him as a character, I think was brilliant. Nick Frost with the voiceover was spot on, and I think that was a real coup for them. The way they carried that character, what he went throughout the series and survived was amazing. Um, and the fact that he was always there to support the kids. He was the support that everyone thought Jod was going to be.
Yeah, I also loved how sort of halfway through the series there was a bit where SM-33, who was of course Smee, which of course is Captain Hook's best friend and Peter Pan,
Yeah,
you could say, where SM-33 does actually attack the children, and Jod actually saves the children from SM-33 when his programming from his pirate master from back in the day sort of kicks in. And I thought they intertwined Jod and SM-33 as being both friendly and then villainous at different times, and they'd always switch, which I thought was pretty cool. Don't know what your thoughts were about that moment when SM-33 sort of goes to attack the children. I think he's about to kill Neil, to be fair, and crush him. Like, absolutely, like, smash his brains in until Jod turns him off.
yeah. I think that was one of the real sort of gripping sort of these kids are in genuine danger sort of moments. And the fact that it was such a simple thing of just switching him off that saved the day, which to me it sort of again made it a little bit realistic but a lot of fun. There was no trying to frantically reprogram and that. It was a flick of the switch, job done. And like you say, it was very good the whole way through the series. You never knew whether Jod was going to be the hero or whether SM-33 or, as you rightly say, Smee was going to be the hero. So I did like that the two characters switched. So it gave the audience a little bit of doubt. And I think that's one thing that this series did succeed in. Um, uh, without spoiling anything, obviously Jod doesn't really get a redemption, and I was actually quite pleased with that because this character, he's more complex than good or evil, and I think that's something that could possibly play out whether in another TV series or in other media that we might find out more about his past. And I think, what we saw in this series was very much the beginning of understanding that character.
Definitely. When we look at our kids, we've got Wim, who's sort of he's the kid who's a bit of a nerd, a bit of a loner. His dad's too busy to spend time with him and listen to him, you could say. His best friend Neil's the opposite. He's also a nerd, but Neil very much has a loving family of brothers and sisters and their mum and dad, who seem to be looking after him, are there for him all the time. But then have Fern, who's sort of a headstrong, sort of strong female character whose mum is also seems to be a strong female character, although her mum seems to be by the rule book, where Fern seems to be again a little bit rebellious in terms of that. And then we have KB, who very much depicts, I would say, sort of charters some disabled characteristics. We see that she sort of has head apparatus, almost similar to what Lobot has in The Empire Strikes Back, but it's also like a front visor. And as we find out in the series, actually, when that's there because it seems like she's maybe had an accident in the past, and that sort of saved her life. And then there's a moment where, when they're out in the adventure, that goes wrong, and if Wim doesn't act fast, then she possibly dies. So I thought it was really cool to have sort of these different, it's 4 children who become really good friends, but each one of them is very different, and we get to see different characteristics in all of them, which was really, really good. KB as well, I suppose, not only channeling that sort of, like I said, disabled person aspect, but also, has same-sex parents as well, which I think is quite a good thing to depict in a show. It's very good awareness. What was your thoughts on sort of all 4 of the children and how they interacted with each other and how they interacted with their own parents as well?
Yeah, like you say, it was a good grouping of the way, you've got some happy sort of family units, fully functioning family units with support networks, and then you've got Wim and Fern, who obviously have got what is more and more common, a broken family, or in Wim's case, obviously a widowed parent, so a parent going through it on their own. And obviously they all sort of act differently when it comes to trying to find the kids. They've all got their own way of dealing with it. The 2 families, obviously, where you've got the more traditional family unit, are probably more organised, but they go for a more straightforward approach, maybe. Whereas, obviously, you've got Fern's mum, who wants to stick to the book, and needs a bit of plodding along by the rest of the group. So the mixture of the family groups, I think, as well, showed a wide perspective of what we recognise in modern life. So I think they did a really good job of actually sort of putting modern life into Star Wars. And the one thing I will say about this, I've had a lot of friends where I've had discussions and they've said it doesn't feel like Star Wars. I said, actually, this feels really like Star Wars to me, because it's an adventure. It's a different part of the galaxy, but it's an adventure. It's kids. It's swashbuckling. And let's face it, unless it's unless it's a complete fantasy world, even Luke Skywalker had parents. His were really dysfunctional. So I like that we see it from a different perspective, but still very much in the world that we love, or the galaxy that we love. And I think the actors each, they captured their parts brilliantly. Neil's parents gave across the emotions even underneath all the makeup, or the I think they did it with a bit of motion capture and a bit of everything with those characters, and it was just done, I think, done really well to capture a variety of family units.
Definitely. And while we have the family units of the kids sort of on the show, we also have the family unit of the pirates, where, as he said, Jod's very much, this captain at the beginning. And I liked how sort of they insinuated that Jod was the captain from the first scene, but they didn't tell you. So it was like, is he, isn't he? And then obviously we find out later that he is when he gets his helmet back towards the end. But we have sort of Although the pirates are quick to maybe be dysfunctional and disown each other, they also are quick to sort of come back. Jod's able to win them over again. So we've talked about the kids there on Aladdin and their family dynamics. What was your thoughts on the pirate dynamic and sort of that kind of family?
Yeah, if you look back, like we've sort of alluded to the stories of like Peter Pan, and you go to um, the stories of Treasure Island and all that. The traditionally pirate crews have been like dysfunctional family units. There's always a different character that plays a different role, and I think as the series went on, there was they they may have only had small parts, but there was different pirates that played different um, places within a family unit. Obviously Vane, I'd say, would be the mischievous or the unruly older brother. You have Brutus, who was obviously he wanted to take over. He wanted to be the leader of the pack. You had Gunter, who was very much I'll follow whoever happens to be leading, and I will follow them. To the point of no return. I'm trying to think of the other. There was a female pirate that was very much sort of sticking to the rules, but also very much a pirate. And there was the sort of devious, and it did actually remind me of Long John Silver. I think it was the Benjar Pranic pirate that we saw in I think it's the scene when Jod's trying to get Smee back, and I believe he's voiced by Alfred Molina, which this character was like, 1 minute he was like, "Oh, you're the wise captain in that," but then his pirate instinct kicked in, and it's like, "Yeah, but you're the one that's got away and everything." So I think that was the way that was done, and I just loved the pirates, and I loved that scene on the pirate planet sort of thing, where all the you saw all these different skullduggery sort of characters going on, and then there was one character. I'm just trying to find the name. I saw it. I'm trying to think of the character, but she basically was oh, that's it, Melna, who was this female character on Port Borgo, who basically could see that the kids were out of their depth and was trying to save them. And obviously, this was the first. So then we've got a sort of motherly character that was brought into the whole thing. So that was captured really well with the pirates, and yeah, I enjoyed that aspect of it. I think that episode, which was it the third episode? Yeah, it would have been the third episode. No, the second and the third episode, where we saw more of that pirate planet and their escape. There was some really, really cool interactions going on there, and I enjoyed the fact that they spent so much time looking at the pirate side of life.
Yeah, definitely. I think if it on the head, I think what I liked was the they sort of go to three different locations outside of Aladdin. So they go to I think it's called Port Boga, which is sort of the pirate port, very similar to Tortuga from Pirates of the Caribbean. Um, like you said, there's a woman there who sort of sees that they may be in trouble and gives them some advice and is there to help. So even this place where it's a crazy, mad place with a lot of bad things happening, there's someone there with a little bit of hope for them, which I thought was really cool. Same can be said when they go off with Jod, when they escape the pirate port, and they end up on that planet where the big sort of satellite telescope is, and they meet the owl. And obviously, at the time, not sure if the owl's their friend or not, but obviously, the owl does have the best interests of the children at heart. does know what Jod's like. And then also when they arrive on the planet that they think is Aladdin, but it isn't. Again, sort of when they meet those other children, sort of the battle hard-won children, you know, they're there in that crazy place where it's chaotic and dangerous. You know, is there, you know, giving good advice and there to help them, which is also very good. What were your thoughts on the places we visited and sort of how it happened? Obviously, you said we went to Port Boga, the pirate port. We went to, I can't remember the name of the planet, but the planet where the giant satellite telescope is, where we meet the owl. Um,
Yeah,
and then obviously the owl is called Keem, I think.
Kim.
It's an unidentified
Kim, yeah.
owl-like alien, and it's a map expert. Um, so yeah, very fun. I don't know what your thoughts were on sort of on these characters, who they meet.
Yeah, no, I thought, as we said, or as I said earlier, there's a journey that these kids go on. Obviously, if you've just mentioned Keen, the owl character was really cool, and when they turned up at the basically observatory, I loved that he had the eye come out, which reminded me obviously of Jabba's palace. And I have to admit, King's voice to begin with, I thought, oh, they've took us. We're going to see Maz Kanata, and the voice to me really made me think of Maz, and I thought, oh, are we now getting to see more of Maz Kanata? Sadly, it wasn't, but King was a really great character because almost Jedi like, which I think they were sort of alluding to. But this mad map crazy person that was there to give them guidance, which I thought was great. And then obviously that episode brought us back into the world of the New Republic because we then had the X-wings turn up. So we knew then that we were now into an area where obviously the New Republic was operating and everything. So that brought us into the Mandoverse, so to speak. Obviously, Vane, I think, was purposely used so that we had a link to the pirates from the Mandoverse. Then, obviously, Ad Akron, which was the planet that they landed on, which was a sister planet to Atin. I thought that was a really clever episode where, again, we've got a planet just like Atatin that was cut off from everything, but they've had a civil war and they've now got these battling sort of factions going on. And it sort of, again, put the kids in a sense of danger, but it also built them into a more of a sort of team for survival. It was almost like they were on a, a work survival weekend on this planet, which I thought was quite a fun way. And obviously, seeing how another planet, almost identical to Atatin, once it had been cut off from the Republic, could then go in a completely different way to the way that Atatin had gone. And obviously, once we find out the actual true story behind Atatin and these other planets, then obviously it sort of you see the breakdown of civilizations and how that can affect. So Atatin to a certain degree, you had the supervisor. So you sort of had because there was the Republic gone, this dictator had almost risen up and was ruling them, and they'd become almost like subservient to him because that was the only way they knew how to survive. But he was still giving them this perfect life, whereas that was juxtaposed by Akron, where you've got a planet where without the Republic, everything's broken down. There's warring factions, and everyone's trying to find a way of taking back control. And obviously, whereas you've got the supervisor's tower on Aten, on Akron, you've got the fallen sanctum. So where it had completely fallen to pieces. which I thought was quite a funny way. It was a fun way of sort of seeing how the fall of the Republic, or in this case, the fall of the Empire, even would then affect other planets, and because there's this loss of leadership, which obviously we've seen sort of through the Mandoverse, because obviously although the New Republic's trying to set up a new republic, very much there's still not the complete control that was there when the Empire was in place. Um, so I really enjoyed that, and then obviously then they sort of discovered a way to get back to At-Atin, uh, but they have to go via this rather fun adventure, and I'm trying to remember the name of the planet that they go to. Lanupa, which again, you've got this whole sort of thing. It's very similar almost to what we saw in The Last Jedi, with this. I'm trying to think of the name of the place that they went to in Last
Canto Bite.
Jedi, but yeah, that's it. It was coming back to me. Obviously, Canto Bite, again, this sort of luxury place. And I thought it was quite cool on Lanupa when you saw the baths and there was the banking clan moons sort of sat there relaxing in the baths, which obviously then we sort of get the hint that obviously the old Republic mints that they're At-Atin actually is. So obviously the moons would have been involved with that planet quite heavily, I would have thought. Um, and then you've got this whole story revealed then of Tak Renard and the Onyx Cinder. So that was a whole different part to the story that just made it a great adventure. But yeah, obviously all these, what was it, 4 different planets in effect that the kids go to. Very different sort of situations that they're in each time on these different planets, but tied in brilliantly to the adventure. So they really are a bit of globetrotters along the way as well.
What's your thoughts on the Republic mints? Do you think they were Imperial mints as well? Because it seems like the last message they received from the Republic was that Order 66 had taken place. And then it looks
Yeah,
like no
it's
one's been
all
there since. So it seems like maybe the Emperor didn't need the mints.
yeah. That's an interesting part of the story that it'd be interesting to see whether that's going to come out in whether it's literature, whether it's um, another series of Skeleton Crew. But it was something that obviously the last episode with the supervisor, where it's revealed that the last message was basically the Jedi are traitors. So obviously we know that the Imperials knew about the mints, but as you say, was it to a certain degree for the Emperor to take complete control? He wouldn't want people to be able to be financed. He wanted the complete control over everything. So he probably did just want to forget about the mints, um, because he wanted them to have to come to him for whatever they wanted, which is probably why these places remained hidden for so long. Um, so yeah, it's an interesting part of the story that I think will come up again at some point, but it's where they explore it to. Um, but it tied it in obviously to where we knew the story to be. Obviously, they didn't know that the Empire had then fallen. In fact, by the sounds of it, they didn't even know that the Empire had risen. You know, they were still working on Old Republic credits. So they were almost stuck in a time warp where they never knew what had happened with the Empire.
Yeah, and I think that would be the same for all planets. So I think if you look at Atarin, obviously they're still making those original Republic credits. They've got a lot of them because the Republic hasn't been to collect in such a long time.
Yeah,
I think if you look
yeah,
at Akron, that place has probably been. I don't think it fell because the Republic fell. I think it maybe Republic fell and it got ransacked by some pirates who found its location and then left it in ruin for the people just to descend into chaos. Do you think?
yeah. Could have been. Maybe that is how Renard found out about it. I think.
Well, I think Tak Renard had definitely been there because in the Akron, that control tower is the same on all of these planets. The
Yeah,
Republic mints, and obviously he'd burned off the coordinates for
yeah.
Aaron, as in he'd seen them and burnt it off so he could go track it down. So yeah, what's your thoughts on Tak Renard and sort of this ideology that he's sort of a legendary pirate, almost like a Blackbeard or a Captain Hook or a Jack Sparrow in our world?
Yeah, I like the idea, and I like the fact that we didn't get to see who he was. That was one thing that I thought was going to be a reveal, but maybe they're saving that for if they do a second season. Because I have to admit, once I found out that Stephen Fry was the voice of the supervisor, I thought, oh, this could be quite fun if the supervisor was actually Tak Renard, and he'd been hiding, a bit like the Wizard of Oz, up in the tower, controlling it, um, making all this money ready for when he wanted to reveal himself. But obviously, they went a different route there with the supervisor being this large droid that took control of everything. But yeah, Tak Renard for me, I think there's more to come on that character, or it'd be a brilliant spin-off series for a comic book, to show us Tak Renard's adventures. And let's face it, Disney and Lucasfilm are creating a lot of these things to create spin-offs and everything as well later on. And I'm sure that's one thing that someone along the line has been thinking of.
Quite possibly. Obviously, we don't really see. Obviously, there is skeletons on board the Onyx Cinder, so I'm assuming one of them is Tak Renard. So they've been dead for a long time. So when you think about Tak Renard in his prime and when he was hunting for this, do you think we're talking, you know, hundreds of years before the Star Wars saga, or do you think we're talking during the Star Wars saga?
I think during the Star Wars saga, I don't think there's been a huge. Um, I think Tak Renard was about possibly, possibly like Clone Wars sort of era, because obviously we know then there was a war going on. During wars, it's the perfect time for crime and everything, and the perfect time for pirates to sort of thrive, as we saw with like Hondo. So I'd almost think that Tak Renard could have been about in the time of Hondo and Arca, maybe a little bit before. But no, it'd be interesting to see. Obviously, like you say, there are skeletons and that on the Onyx Cinder. I like the way that the main skeleton that we all think is a skeleton turns out to be Smee. But I love the other thing is as well. Obviously, the Onyx Cinder's been made to look a lot older and a lot more decrepit than it actually is, which is obviously a brilliant reveal that comes off later on in the series.
My theory on that was I thought it had an extra layer of armor, right? And that's what SM33 tells me. We've got the button there, obviously, like this, like self destructs the extra armor. I feel he put that armor on so that he would get through the defenses of Aladdin.
Could be, yeah.
I think that's why he survives that. Also, when they get there, they've already lost the armor to escape that giant crab. I think, they're saying that ship is the usual pickup ship for. That's why they think it's the Republic on Aladdin.
Yeah,
So he must have obviously knew that, Tak Ranod knew that, and was able to find or steal or acquire that Republic ship. And then he hid it in loads of armour so people didn't recognise it, but also so he could get through the defences. And it was like one big plan, wasn't it? But then obviously looks like he's crash landed and died in the crash landing, maybe. I mean, that sounds a bit too tongue-in-cheek for me. I think like that they'd all die in the crash when we see people crash spaceships all the time in Star Wars and they don't die.
Yeah, yeah. I have to admit, I think there's more of a mystery behind what happened to Tak Renard that's got another story to come. That's my personal feeling. Because, like you say, a pirate like that doesn't, yeah, the ship had crashed, but it was by no means obliterated to the point that everyone would have died outright, Maybe if they got stuck in there, yeah, but I don't know. There is, to me, it looked like maybe they died because there was a rebellion once they got there to At-Atin or something like that. But I think
Maybe
there's
that's
more
why
to
they
the
crashed.
story.
If they maybe when they arrived and then they got through the defences, that's when the mutiny has started, and that's when they've all killed each other, and that's why the ships
Could
crashed.
be,
Maybe.
yeah, could be, because it's. I sort of think almost as well because Smee, when he talks about the land, I've had better landings, or I've done. It almost made me think that maybe Smee was the one that had crashed it in the first place. But I don't know. Again, there's so much more that we could learn later on. I think that's one thing with this series. It's left us with loads of little plot points that could, with lots of little Easter eggs to find out later on. But and I loved the way the Onyx Cinder, obviously could shed its skin and reveal this beautiful ship underneath. Um, and I've got to. That's one thing I loved about this series, and I've got to go back to that bit. Is the episode with which was directed by Bryce Dallas Howard, where they had that crab thing that was gonna basically crush the ship. Um, they went back and used Phil Tippett's studio, I believe, to do stop motion animation, so that it was more in keeping with the original Star Wars to what we've seen in the later films and everything. It was really nice touch to have Tippett involved, going back to his involvement with the original Star Wars trilogy. Phil Tippett is a big hero of mine. He obviously worked heavily with Spielberg on Jurassic Park. And if you look into what he's done since then, he's very much he's a creative that does a lot of different films and is creating his own artwork. And he's a really interesting character, so it's great to see him back involved, or his studio involved with Star Wars like it has been, because I think that was a nice tribute to the original series. And if you
I'm
get a
not sure if it
chance
was
to
a
watch,
tribute. I think I,
it just
I
brought
know
it
this is.
more.
Well, probably me and you probably disagree on this. I think there's this idea that like the latest Star Wars films like stayed away from like practical effects and stuff, but like I think all movies now, especially in this genre, like have visual effects and computers. But like I feel like Star Wars still has so many practical effects. Still, they're just maybe they're used
Oh
in the
yeah,
same scenes as this. And I think if you look at, I feel if you need to do a crab, you'd go to Phil Tippett. It's not, oh, we need to fit Phil Tippett in. What can you make us? It's like, no, like, we're on here. There's going to be a crab creature. Who do we want to do the crab creature? Well, we'll go to the best. It's not about going to someone for the sake of going to someone for old glory. It's like, no, we'll go to the best person who can create the best crab. And that is Phil Tippett because he's the
no,
best at what he does. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, no, I do agree with you there, but I do think that it is when you think about how modern stuff is done, it would have been a lot easier for them to have done a computer generated but like you say, they have gone for the best, and Phil Tippett is the best at what he does. So yeah, no, I'm just glad that they did go down that route instead of going down a route that they could have maybe took an easier route, because what Phil Tippett creates, I think, is a lot more in keeping with what we love about Star Wars, and I'm glad that they have done that. But it just added to me, because I have to admit, some of the Star Wars that we've had, that as you know, I loved the Mandalorian and that, and I enjoyed Obi-Wan. But obviously, Obi-Wan, a lot of that was done on the volume, and for me, because that was done on the volume, it did lose some of the magic that I think you sort of get with the more practical stuff. And I'm glad that it is now, again, if you look at Obi-Wan, obviously the time frame that it was, we were just coming out of COVID. You had all that, so there was a lot of restrictions that they still had to work under, um, and they were still finding their feet. So the volume was a way of doing that. I understand why that was done, but I'm glad now that they're sort of finding their way back to the more dramatic way of almost doing it. That it captures it, and I think it captures the magic of what we love about Star Wars.
What's your thoughts on how the New Republic were depicted in the series?
Yeah, I wanted to see a bit more of them. Um, I was, obviously they've sort of come into it, um, sort of the heroes, to stop the pirates, which we've seen in the past. Um, I was convinced, absolutely convinced, especially every time we saw the X-wings. I thought, they're going to link it back to the Mandoverse, and we're going to get Carson Teva. And I can understand why. Obviously, Carson Teva could be anywhere in the, doing what he needs to do. But I would have liked to have seen him in it, because I think he's a great actor that ties the Mandoverse and all these different series together nicely. Um, and I think it would have fitted really well with the story. So I was a little bit disappointed that he didn't pop up, but at the same time, in some ways, this series was really good at not chucking in characters from other series for the sake of it. So there were some of the roles that could have easily been done by a character that we already knew. But I think because they wanted to give it that little bit, maybe we were a little bit further out from where we've been before. Obviously, a little bit different. I completely understand why they didn't go for characters that we'd seen, and I like that about it. But I did wish, I just thought, when we saw those X-wings, great, it's the New Republic, and they started going through the pilots, and I thought, we're going to get the nice little Carson Teva, or even we could have got Zeb, but we didn't, and it wasn't that they needed to be there, but I just thought, that would have been really cool if they had been there. But overall, seeing the New Republic, I loved the B Wings coming in. Really got to shine properly, seeing them at work and just obliterate the pirate frigate. Um, Overall, that was cool once they'd been called. And I did like the way the parents sort of all worked together to try and get this message up in the air, to begin with, and you saw them running from the droids, and one by one they were getting stunned, and then it was passed on to the next parent to try. I thought that was really, really fun and a clever story piece to show that they were determined to work together as a team to get their kids back.
Definitely. I think for me, the New Republic, again, we're not too sure when this is set. If it's during the Mandalorian or just before, just after. I think, yes, they could have easily put Carson Teva in here. but I feel that like he's probably dealing with things in that part
Yeah,
of the galaxy where the Mando verse is taking place. If that makes sense. So
yeah,
I think they could have put him in, but I'm glad they didn't because I didn't feel like they needed. It didn't take anything away us not knowing who those pilots were. The pilots were there to fight off the pirates, and they did that, so they did their job. Um, the same as I think with Tak Renard, it's obviously a new pirate for us. Star Wars is a new character, although he's going to have a rich history, I think, which we're probably going to learn about in comic books and maybe series. I think, obviously I know a lot of people wanted it to be Hondo Ohnaka, but like I feel Hondo Ohnaka's never mentioned this mint before. We've seen a lot of Hondo, right? So
yeah.
I do feel like going to a new character and introducing a new character, which can give us new lore, I think makes sense rather than trying to appease sort of fans. That makes sense with fan service.
Yeah, no, completely, and I agree with you that it's good that they did stay away with it because it's so easy to do fan service or give us what we're expecting, but to create something new is also a really good thing for us as Star Wars fans.
Definitely. So, what's your thoughts on Tak Renard then? How would you want the legends of Tak Renard to be told?
I, I don't. They could be really cool as an animated series. They could be really cool as a comic book, a series of books, or even a new um, TV series to go along with this. So yeah, there's so many possibilities. Tak Renard and Jod are both characters that I want to find out a bit more about.
Definitely. I hope Tak Renard was sort of around before the Clone Wars, and I like to think that maybe he crashed there before the Clone Wars started, which would be cool. Um, but I do love the fact that Anakin's last message from the Republic was about the Jedi being traitors, and then how sort of the supervisor's like, okay, well, we're still just going to keep making money, keep going until someone turns up. It's really cool. Let's talk about George Norwood. So for me, he was the main event. I thought Jude Law was absolutely fantastic. And I thought his character stole the show in this entire series. Um, as a pirate, as a friend to the children, a mentor to the children, a savior to the children, as an enemy to the children. All of these things. He was quite complex, I thought. And although he did things against the children and was sort of nasty towards the children at times, I never got the feeling that Jod was actually evil. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there, and I think that's revealed in the final episode where he sort of talks about how he was picked out from the gutter, so to speak, by this Jedi, this mysterious Jedi woman, who one of my friends the other day said to me, "Come on, who do you think this female Jedi is? Is it someone we've seen?" I said, "I don't know. I was thinking about it. Could have, could it have been Asajj Ventress? Because that would explain his sort of darker side. But as a character, Jod sort of did remind me of Asajj. He's he's a survivor. He's got to find a way of surviving, whether that's he's selfish because he's always needed to be selfish because he's been in the gutter, and I think that's what comes across. He's a typical, almost like a Del Boy sort of character as the series goes on. He's got all these different personas that he puts on. So in order to survive, he becomes a different person. So does anyone actually know the true Jod or whoever he is? Because he's always putting on a different name or a different character to survive, basically. And obviously, he's picked up these Jedi methods as a way of surviving, not because he wants to be a Jedi. He was taught them because he was seen to have the ability, but he was taught to use them as a survival method. So for me, again, I want to see more of the character because I think they've cleverly created a very complex character that has a lot of story to tell. And as you say, Jude Law, I, I've liked Jude Law. I loved him when he played as Watson against Robert Downey Jr.'s Holmes. I thought he was brilliant in those. I thought he was one of the strongest things about the latest Harry Potter spin offs. I thought his portrayal of Dumbledore was different, but still within universe. And other stuff that he's done, and we've just had Christmas, and obviously one of the classic Christmas films, as it appears now, is The Holiday. And I watched it with a friend a few weeks ago, and I thought actually Jude Law was really good in that. And again, he was more of a complex character than you initially thought he was. And what I've liked about it, and obviously, I nearly went up to London for the press day that they did with Jedi News up there for Leicester Square. In some ways, I wish I had because if you get a chance, watch the interview that James has done on Jedi News with Jude Law, because Jude Law was clearly, and from all the other interviews I've seen, he really enjoyed becoming part of the Star Wars universe. And I recently saw that he's actually, for the first time, going to be appearing at a Comic Con in America. Now, if you think that, Jude Law's been in obviously the Harry Potter style stuff and that, so he would have been invited to it beforehand. But I think he's now got the bug with the Star Wars side of things of really getting involved with the fans as well. And to me, his sort of interaction with people reminds me of how Ewan McGregor is with a lot of the fans, and it's the enthusiasm and a genuine love for the series. And I think he's brought a lot of freshness to the series with the way he's done it. And, he's played a character that you don't know whether to love him or hate him, but he's played it brilliantly.
Have you heard of an actress called Yasmin Al Masri?
Yes, and I'm trying to think why I've heard of her.
So there was a deleted scene filmed. So although we don't know if John's telling the truth, right, when he tells that story about a Jedi finding him, but he probably is telling the truth. So this actress went to Instagram. She posted pictures of herself in her Jedi robes, in her Jedi haircut. And she says, "This was the shortest acting job I have done, but the most meaningful to the child in me. Playing a Jedi for one scene in Skeleton Crew. I gave a speech with the crew when the crew wrapped me on set saying, 'You just created the first Arab female Jedi. Thank you.' The scene unfortunately didn't make it to the final cut because these things happen, but I cannot share my experience and feelings."
Ooh.
So essentially, yeah. So there was a scene filmed where we see the Jedi. Now we don't have the Jedi name, but in the pictures, I recommend you go to Instagram and check them out if you're listening. So I have a feeling that this Jedi found Jod after Order 66. I feel the Jedi was maybe already trying to survive herself,
Yeah.
and then took Jod under her wing, and then obviously Jod's watched her die, I suppose. So without being, that was probably his biggest chance to help. If you think about the other children who we see, they get taken from nowhere, taken to the temple, and given everything to succeed. But
Yeah.
Jod was taken from nowhere, homeless, got given a little insight of what it could be like, then had it taken away from him. So I feel that it's not as if Jod threw it away. I feel it was taken away from Jod. So I feel Jod is very much doing everything Jod does is to survive. I feel, again, even when he gets to at him, his plan is for the mint to keep going, hitting the order of the mint, for the people of Atran to go back to how they were, and just he will be the supervisor. So if they enjoy those lives before, they'll enjoy them now, right? Because they'll be the same once they get over the initial invasion. And he's really not trying to sort of cause too much chaos. He's just trying to sort of create that life where he has the money and he doesn't have to rely on other people now. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, completely. Yeah, no, for me, he's definitely he's a character. As I said, is more complex, and it's a survival instinct is everything that he's been doing.
And I think it sums it up like at the end, when the children are escaping the tower and the New Republic arrive, we see the X-Wings, we see the B-Wings using those charged lasers that we first saw in Star Wars Rebels, which was fantastic. And Wim actually goes, Jod, are you coming? And Jod looks to say, like, no. And he's looking out. You can see sort of the New Republic taking out the pirates. And Jod's almost like, in his mind, I think he's thinking, well, kids, you got me here. New Republic, you got me. I'm just going to watch and see what happens. And then, like, whatever happens type of thing. We'll deal with that next. I feel like if he does go to New Republic jail, he's going to be trying to escape, isn't he?
Yeah, yeah, and that's where this could possibly pick up. Um, it, that's the whole thing. It's been left very open at the end, and as I say, he didn't sort of have a redemption, but he sort of was left at a point where we want to know what's happened to this character. So I think that's left us with a very open book at the end of it.
Yeah, and I feel there's times in the series where, especially once he gets the lightsaber, where he could very easily kill the children, kill the children's parents, he could kill the people of Alan. But he never does. I think he ignites it and he sort of tries to look hard, but I don't think he is hard, and I don't think he was ever going to harm them. If that makes sense. I think that's clear. Obviously, the only thing he does is he takes off SM-33's head, which he knows is a droid. And I thought he looked pretty nifty when he was defending himself against those AT-AT droids when he deflected a few bolts back. But other than that, although he's trying to be in control of that moment, right, in that control tower, I feel because he won't go too far, because he won't kill them, he was always going to fail. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think the
Yeah,
children
no,
believe him when he
completely.
says, I'll kill people. The children believe him because you would, as a child, and an adult tells you that. But I think his actions tell you a different story where he was never going to. He was just trying to get control of the mint. That's all he wanted.
I think even when he's got the lightsaber held at Wendell's throat, um, I at no point thought Wendell was at risk. Like you say, the kids would have thought that he could at any point skewer the dad, but I didn't personally think he'd go through with it. And I felt whenever you saw him sort of wielding the lightsaber, it was more out of frustration and necessity than it was out of wanting to do any sort of damage.
Definitely, I agree with that. What's your thoughts on how sort of all the kids and parents overcame sort of their fears to help? Obviously, the last episode's called, the real heroes, and I think the real heroes, the New Republic are the heroes, but the real heroes are the parents and the children of Anakin. Who have Neil very much uses that turbo laser. You have KB who uses the ship, and although I was disappointed with how they executed the ship crash, because I feel like they were trying to play it off as like KB's dead, and the children believe that. But when you see the crash, it's like, nah, it's just definitely not. I mean, you didn't think it would kill off anyway, but they didn't even like. My thought was, no, like if anything, that's a soft landing. Like, and later on we see it's a soft landing, like a really soft landing. But she's got to play a part, and we see Fern and Wim, being very strong for their parents in the control tower. And then obviously we see, I think Wim's dad very much comes into it, especially when he grips his fist and punches Jod, very Biff Tannen style from Back to the Future. Marty McFly's dad punching Biff. That's what I thought of when I seen that.
Yep.
And then obviously we see sort of Fern's mum, who's very much by the book and acting the supervisor, and we need to stick to the grand plan, the great work, so to speak. But she eventually pulls the lever that exposes the defences so that the New Republic can come and save the day. What were your thoughts on sort of on all that and how the parents and children came together to sort of save Aladdin?
Yeah, one thing, just go back to what you said there about KB's soft landing. Again, I think you're right. As viewers, we were supposed to realise that she wasn't at risk. But I think it was, again, the whole point that the kids were watching it, and to them, it was horrifying, and she was a goner. And I think that sort of it was actually quite good storytelling, because that's how life is. As a kid, everything feels more dramatic than it is. As you grow older, you become more perceptive to what's going on, and you realise, yeah, in the grand scheme of things, this isn't as bad as it could be. So I think that again showed that perfectly. The characters, their progression, Wim's dad, Wendell, I think he went from being, this character who's sort of trying to do the best for his son, and quite frankly, at the beginning of the film, he was failing. He wasn't there for him when he was needing him, because he was trying to do what any parent would do. But when the end of the day came through, like any good father should, he came through for Win, and I think he was a really strong adult character in the whole series. So I was impressed with him. Obviously, Fern's mother, she she came across very officious, very much like what we'd seen of Republic staff, or officers, or to put better word of it, civil servants in the Republic. But she had a growth that, obviously she saw all of her beliefs with the supervisor basically shattered in front of her. Um, but it still took her time to realise, that it wasn't the be all and end all. But then when she needed to do her part, she pulled the lever, which was a big part, a big progression of her character. And the other parents, again, they clearly showed that they would do anything for their kids, and I think that was brilliantly done. Neil, for me, I quite liked him as a character, and his progression, was very much like a lot of kids, scared of everything, but eventually finds his way through life and fights through his fears. Um, KB was a character that really did shine for me. I think she was brilliant. That episode where she sort of nearly died, but she almost protected Wim by not telling him how serious it was, and that is what she'd been doing the entire time. She was too scared to show that she was struggling, because she always wanted to be there, and she looked up to Fern. And obviously, eventually, she had to show, she showed Fern that she did have weaknesses. She wasn't as strong as Fern thought she was, but at the same time, Fern was like, well, actually, I know, but you're still my best friend. So I think those characters came through really well as the series went on. And I think the youngsters did a really good job of playing those parts. And again, watching some of the interviews with the young actors, I think they gained a lot from making this series, because they gained friendships. They talked about how before they even started filming the series, the directors or the creators got them to bond together by sitting and watching films together, sort of having sleepovers and parties together, just to bond as a unit. And I think that came across quite well on screen.
Definitely. I thought when you see Atat in life, sort of, the normal Atat in life, sort of before the kids leave, It very much felt like the Matrix to me. Like everyone's plugged in, everyone's sort of on job. Um, sort of worker bees all doing the queen bees sort of doing. Obviously, that illusion's now been shattered because the New Republic have turned up, so the New Republic are there. You know, even if they can get the supervisor back online, the New Republic are probably going to be like, well, actually, like you've been making all this currency for a Republic that died. We are a New Republic, and we have, you know, they might want to use them as a mint to make currency for the New Republic, but it won't be a case of being controlled like that. There'll be a certain amount of freedom, I imagine. So everybody on that planet's going to have to sort of, I'm not saying adapt from a cult like life, but I suppose it was almost like being in the Matrix, being in sort of it was a nice cult, but like now they're aware that there's such a wider world out there. The Republic's fallen, the Empire's risen, and the Empire's fallen. New Republic's here, and what's your thoughts on the future of At-Atin, and how do you think the people of At-Atin are going to sort of adapt to what the galaxy actually is now with the New Republic being there?
Yeah, obviously the ending we see them all sort of cheering because the New Republic saved them from these pirates. But it's a good question. Do they really understand that life's changing in a big way for them now? Because, like you say, they have been living. The description of a cult to the supervisor is perfect because they condition their kids not to ask questions. When you think how long had this been going on, it's an interesting concept. And yeah, you've got this whole civilization now that's basically coming out of being told what to do, having these robots walking around, watching their every move, to a whole new lifestyle. That could be a series in itself. Is there going to be a group of the humans now that take on the role of the supervisor to keep this running, and how will that operate? But it's the whole thing to do with the world creation that is so fun about the Star Wars galaxy.
Now, Atin is known to the galaxy. I feel the New Republic probably don't need the money because when you think about it, they might need money made, like as in a bank, to have the money and then supply it to its citizens, right? But I don't think they need the money to buy things because, as we know from sort of the very end of the War of the Empire, Mon Mothma's very much about trying to sort of demilitarize the New Republic as best you can. And they have that small fleet that we see get destroyed in the Force Awakens, but small. They're very much demilitarized down after the defeat of the Empire. Somebody who does need credits, I would say, and when you look at how good the First Order fleet is, obviously building that in secret, but that needs financed. Do you think we will see maybe, in Dave Filoni's continued Mandoverse and Heir to the Empire, will Thrawn come, or this Imperial Secret Council come to steal the money about that in so they can fund the building of the First Order?
It's definitely a possibility. It's all there out there at the time. You know, for one thing, we know from obviously Canto Bight that currency still very much plays a part in the New Republic later on in the series. So it's got to be created somewhere. So that would almost suggest that At-Atin or places like At-Atin were continuing to work.
Definitely. Any closing thoughts? Anything about Skeleton Crew that we've missed that you want to talk about?
No, I think for me it's been an enjoyable series. I think they did it well. I think they did something different, but a lot more. Um, it still kept it very much for me in Star Wars. So I enjoyed it. It's a good series that you can sit and watch as a family. You don't have to be completely stuck in the lore of Star Wars. And I think as a whole, it's been a really good series. I know there's already been sort of stories floating around. Is there going to be a season two? I've got a feeling there won't be. I've got a feeling some of the stories will continue on in other media. But obviously, the character of Jod could quite possibly pop up in any more of the Mandoverse. Any of the characters could. And I think overall, it's just been a really nice, obviously, sort of stopgap before we dive back into what we've got coming with the likes of Andor, and with then after that the Mandalorian and Grogu. So I think they've done it really well.
No, definitely. I think so. Is there anything non-skeleton crew like Star Wars wise you want to cover?
No, I think at the moment everything's pretty quiet for me. I'm still diving into the world of Star Wars Unlimited. Obviously, there's a lot of new stuff coming with that, and I'm looking at the stuff on the Game Genix website and thinking, oh my god, that's going to cost me a small fortune. But no, that's about all my Star Wars at the moment. I am hopefully over the next few weeks going to be delving into a few more things, but I've got a lot going on behind the scenes.
Fantastic. Well, that brings an end to our Skeleton Crew deep dive review. We hope everybody enjoyed the series and enjoyed us talking about it. Jason, where can people find you on social media?
As always, at Hondo Ling.
And you can find myself on Instagram and on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Geordie Jedi Pete. You can also find the podcast on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Boars Star. And you can find the podcast everywhere else, including Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, at Star Wars Podcast. If you're listening on Apple Music or on Spotify, please leave us a 5-star review. A lovely little sentence. Keeps me and Jason smiling all day. Only takes you a few moments, and it does help people find the show. Again, if you're listening on any of the other wonderful podcast applications out there is a lot of them now, as podcasts take over the entire world. If it gives you an option to leave a review, just leave us a top review, as many stars as you can. A lovely little sentence, again, keeps us smiling all day, and it does help people find the show. May the force be with you all, and remember, always tell that to Kanja Club.